Okay, then let's go further. Okay, I've selected some text that will help us to understand some different aspects of the nature of the Buddha's teaching. And one aspect, which I alluded to before, is that it doesn't demand that one place blind belief in the teaching. There are certain principles that the Buddha teaches which are beyond the capacity of ordinary people to see for themselves. But the Buddha begins with things that we can observe for ourselves and see for ourselves and verify for ourselves. And one excellent example of this comes in a discourse that the Buddha gave to a group of people who were living in a certain town called Kesaputta. These people, their clan name was the Kalamas. And it's said that a number of spiritual teachers with different beliefs, different doctrines had come to this town, and they had taught the people their own doctrines, promoting and praising their own doctrines, and tearing down the views of their opponents. And so the Kalamas, when the Buddha arrived in their town, the Kalamas came to him, and they said that they are perplexed and doubt about which of these teachers is speaking truth and which are speaking falsehood. Now these people, the Kalamas, they were not disciples of the Buddha. They were just, it was just the Buddha would go traveling from town to town and village to village, giving his teachings. And so when the Kalamas heard that the Buddha came, they knew that the Buddha had a good reputation. And so they came to him to ask for him to clarify the conflicting teachings of the other teachers. But in this situation, the Buddha didn't say, forget about the teachings of the others. I'm going to tell you the truth. You follow my teaching. But instead, if you could see, he says that it's fitting for you to be perplexed. It's fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen about a perplexing matter. And then he said to the Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, what's been passed down through one generation of teachers to another. Don't depend upon a lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of texts, by logic and inferential reasoning. Don't believe a teacher just because he's very eloquent, and very impressive. And don't even believe somebody just because you think that he is your teacher. The Buddha then says, when you know for yourselves these things are unwholesome, these things are blamable, these things are blamed by the wise, these things, if followed up, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. And then he used a common sense way of questioning. So he asked the Kalamas, what do you think when greed, hatred, and delusion arise in you? Does it lead to your welfare or to your harm? They say it leads to harm. Then the Buddha said, a person who is greedy, hating, and deluded, overpowered by greed, hatred, and delusion, motivated by these mental forces, will destroy life, steal the belongings of others, commit sexual misconduct, speak lies, and will also persuade others to act in the same way. So will that lead to his harm and suffering for a long time? And the answer is yes. And so, through argumentation, for questioning, the Buddha gets the Kalamas, the people, to see that these things, greed, hatred, delusion, and the actions that flow from them are unwholesome, they're unethical, they're blameworthy, they're criticized by the wise, and if one acts upon them, they'll lead to one's harm and suffering. And then in the opposite way, the Buddha speaks about a person who is without greed, hatred, and delusion. So when the mind is free from greed, hatred, and delusion, does it lead to one's well-being or to one's harm? It leads to one's well-being. And a person without greed, hatred, and delusion will avoid taking life, stealing, sexual misconduct, and false speech, and persuade others to do likewise. And that will lead to their welfare and happiness for a long time. Okay, so from this we could see that the Buddha here is appealing to something that one could see and verify for oneself. And in a way, this is like the essence of his teaching, is to overcome and to eliminate greed, hatred, and delusion. These are what the Buddha calls the three unwholesome roots. They're the roots of all the other disturbing and distressing mental states. All arise and are rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. And greed, hatred, and delusion, those are the underlying motives for all types of unwholesome action. And so the ultimate aim of the Buddha's teaching is to overcome and actually to eradicate, to eliminate greed, hatred, and delusion. Because those things, we could see, lead to unwholesome behavior. They bring harm to oneself, harm to others. And here, like without appealing to any kind of unverifiable doctrine, the Buddha just appeals to what you could see for yourself just by personal investigation. Of course, the Kalamas must have been rather intelligent people to understand, to understand this rather easily, since maybe nowadays if you go to certain groups of people and you say, is greed good or bad? They'll say, greed is good. And if somebody does commit some wrong to you, should you have hatred towards them or endure it patiently? And I'll say, it's okay to have hatred towards them and to commit violence against them. But if one reflects on the ultimate consequences of acting on greed and hatred, one could see that that is harmful.